Either start paying $800 a month in rent or find somewhere else to live, Mom, my son told me over dinner in the home I had signed over to him just 3 years earlier. At 74, with modest retirement savings and a broken heart, I packed my essentials and left without argument. What Daniel couldn't have anticipated was that my departure would lead to revelations about the true value of family legacy. Revelations that would bring him to my new doorstep 1 week later, face to face with the powerful community I had quietly built while he thought I was merely his dependent mother. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Wilson. At 74, I've discovered that life's most profound lessons often arrive wrapped in packages of heartbreak. I grew up in Millfield, a small farming community in central Ohio, where everyone knew not just your name, but your grandparents' names too. My father managed the local grain cooperative for 38 years, and my mother taught piano to generations of children in our front parlor. "Remember, Maggie," my father would say as he reviewed the cooperative's books at our kitchen table, "what we build in this life isn't really ours. We're just temporary caretakers passing it along." This philosophy of stewardship over ownership became the foundation of how I understood both prosperity and responsibility. My mother reinforced these values through her teaching, often accepting jars of homemade preserves or hand-knitted scarves as payment from families who couldn't afford her already modest fees. By the time I left for Ohio State in 1968, these principles were so deeply ingrained that they shaped every major decision I would make throughout my life. I studied home economics with plans to teach, carrying forward my parents' commitment to practical education that strengthened families and communities. I met Robert during my sophomore year at a campus volunteer event building homes for low-income families. He was a civil engineering student with calloused hands and thoughtful eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Unlike many ambitious young men of that era, Robert spoke more about the problems he wanted to solve than the money he hoped to make. "I want to build things that matter," he told me during our early courtship walks along the Olentangy River. "Infrastructure that serves people who need it most. Water systems, affordable housing, public spaces where communities can gather." We married in 1972 in my parents' garden, surrounded by neighbors who had watched me grow up and Robert's close-knit family from Cleveland. Instead of spending on an elaborate honeymoon, we pooled our modest savings for a down payment on a small fixer-upper in Columbus, where Robert had secured a position with the municipal engineering department. Those early years taught us resourcefulness, through necessity. Robert's entry-level salary covered our basic needs while I finished my teaching certification and began working with community extension programs. Every improvement to our modest home came through our own labor, painting weekends, laying tile after work, gardening Sundays, often with guidance from family members who would drive in to help. Our son Daniel arrived in 1976, a serious baby with his father's analytical mind and my determination. 2 years later came Catherine, gentler in spirit, but with a quiet persistence that would later serve her well in nursing school. From their earliest days, we tried to instill the same values that had shaped our lives: community responsibility, stewardship of resources, and the understanding that relationships matter more than possessions. "Things are just things," became our family mantra, repeated when toys broke or clothes wore out. "It's how we treat each other that counts." We lived modestly but comfortably, gradually improving our home as Robert advanced in his career, and I developed respected programs teaching financial literacy and household management to families throughout the county. As the children grew, their different personalities became more pronounced. Daniel showed an early aptitude for mathematics and a fascination with money that we initially interpreted as natural curiosity. When he was 10, he created elaborate spreadsheets tracking his allowance, calculating compound interest on his savings account with meticulous precision. He has his father's analytical mind, I would tell friends who remarked on his unusual interests. He'll make a wonderful engineer someday. But Daniel's focus remained on financial systems rather than physical structures. By high school, he was reading investment books and following market trends while his peers were focused on sports and social activities. Catherine developed differently, showing natural empathy that drew people to her. She volunteered at the local hospital from age 16, eventually pursuing nursing with plans to work in underserved communities. Some problems can't be solved with money, she would say when Daniel suggested economic solutions to social challenges. Sometimes people just need someone to be present with them in their suffering. The contrasts in their approaches to life became more pronounced during their college years. Daniel pursued business and finance at Northwestern, securing prestigious internships that emphasized maximizing returns and optimizing assets. Catherine chose a state nursing program, supplementing her education with volunteer work at free clinics and community health initiatives. They're different expressions of the same foundational values, Robert would reassure me when I worried about Daniel's increasing focus on wealth accumulation. He's learning to create resources that can later be directed toward meaningful impact. Robert's sudden heart attack at 58 forced a painful recalibration in all our lives. After 30 years of marriage, I found myself a widow navigating unfamiliar financial territory while processing profound grief. His municipal pension provided basic support, but careful financial management became essential as I adjusted to a single income and uncertain future needs. Daniel, by then working for a financial services firm in Chicago, stepped in with professional guidance. Mom, you need to think about optimizing your assets, not just preserving capital, he explained during weekend visits, introducing terms that felt foreign to the stewardship approach Robert and I had always followed. Still, I recognized the changing economic landscape required adaptation, and his expertise offered valuable perspective. When Catherine accepted a position with Doctors Without Borders that would take her overseas for extended periods, Daniel suggested I consider selling our family home. It's too much house for one person, Mom, and the maintenance will become increasingly difficult as you age. The market's strong right now. You could downsize, invest the difference, and create more. Security. After careful consideration, I decided to sell the home where we had raised our family. The market indeed proved strong, yielding considerably more than we could have imagined when purchasing our starter home decades earlier. Following Daniel's guidance, I invested the majority of proceeds with his firm while reserving enough to purchase a comfortable 2-bedroom condominium in a senior-oriented community near my longtime friends and church. You've set yourself up well, Daniel assured me while reviewing the transaction documents. With these investments and your pension, you should be comfortable through retirement without touching the principal, which means you'll have something meaningful to leave behind someday. This reference to legacy, to the stewardship values Robert and I had emphasized throughout our parenting, provided reassurance that despite his professional focus on financial optimization, Daniel still connected with our fundamental family principles. The following 3 years established new rhythms as I adjusted to condominium living while maintaining active community involvement. I volunteered at the local library teaching financial literacy classes, led a widows support group at my church, and served on the board of a small foundation providing emergency assistance to families facing housing instability. My financial situation remained stable through modest pension income supplemented by conservative investment returns, allowing occasional travel to visit Catherine during her brief returns to the States. The suggestion that I consider living with Daniel and his wife Jennifer came during one of our monthly phone calls. "We've been thinking, Mom," he explained. "That condo association keeps raising fees, and you're paying for amenities you barely use. We have plenty of space in our new house, and it would make sense financially for all of us." The proposal triggered mixed emotions, appreciation for the apparent concern balanced against uncertainty about relinquishing my independence. After thoughtful consideration, including open conversation with Jennifer about mutual expectations, I decided the arrangement could benefit everyone while allowing my condominium to be sold during another strong market period. Just think of what this means for your legacy, Daniel emphasized while helping coordinate the sale. The condo proceeds can be invested for growth rather than tied up in housing costs. It's exactly what Dad would have wanted, maximizing resources for future impact. This invocation of Robert's priorities gave me momentary pause, as his approach had always balanced financial prudence with present quality of life, rather than maximizing future assets. Still, the opportunity to strengthen family connections held genuine appeal, particularly as Catherine's international work meant I saw her rarely. The move to their suburban Chicago home proceeded smoothly, my possessions downsized to fit the guest suite they had designated as my private space. The first months established comfortable routines. I contributed through meal preparation and household management, while maintaining independence through volunteer activities with a nearby senior center and church. Financial arrangements remained unstructured initially, with my occasional contributions toward groceries or household expenses accepted appreciatively but never explicitly requested. My investment accounts and pension remained independently managed, though Daniel continued providing professional oversight during our weekly family dinners. The subtle shifts in household dynamic emerged gradually. First came increasing comments about the financial burden of maintaining their large home, references to property tax increases, maintenance costs, and the expenses of their professional lifestyle. These observations typically emerged during discussions of my investment performance, creating implicit connection between their household contributions and my financial resources. "The market's been stagnant lately," Daniel would note while reviewing my quarterly statements. "But that's why we diversified your portfolio, protecting against downturns." Meanwhile, the property tax assessment on this place went up another 8%. Jennifer's contributions to these conversations revealed different perspective on our living arrangement. "We designed this space specifically as an in-law suite," she mentioned during one dinner discussion. "It actually added nearly $100,000 to our construction budget, but we wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable." These comments, delivered without explicit expectations, nevertheless created growing awareness that my presence was viewed through a financial lens rather than primarily as family connection. The values disconnect became increasingly apparent through their response to Catherine's request for family contribution toward her temporary return to pursue additional medical certifications. "She's made her choices," Daniel stated when I mentioned Catherine's plans. "International medicine isn't exactly the path to financial stability. We can't subsidize every idealistic decision. We have our own future to consider." This dismissal of his sister's meaningful work, saving lives in crisis regions, revealed significant departure from the values Robert and I had attempted to instill. The emphasis on financial stability over service contribution indicated fundamental shift in Daniel's perspective that troubled me deeply. 13 months after moving into their home, the subtle implications became explicit expectation during an ordinary weeknight dinner. "Jennifer and I have been looking at our household budget," Daniel began after casual discussion of their upcoming vacation plans. "With inflation and the increased costs of maintaining this property, we need to establish more structured financial arrangements." He slid a printed spreadsheet across the table, a detailed breakdown of household expenses with calculations allocating portions to my presence. "Based on square footage, utilities, and common area usage, we've determined that $800 monthly would represent fair contribution toward your living expenses here." The methodical approach, reminiscent of landlord-tenant arrangement rather than family support, stunned me into momentary silence. When I finally found words, I asked for clarification rather than immediate response. "Are you asking me to pay rent to live with you?" "Rent has negative connotations," Daniel replied with the professional tone he typically reserved for client interactions. "We're simply establishing appropriate financial boundaries that respect everyone's contributions to the household." You're living in what would otherwise be income-producing space. Jennifer nodded agreement. Many of our colleagues with parent living arrangements have much more formal structures. We're just trying to be transparent about expectations rather than letting unspoken assumptions create tension. I see, I responded quietly, mind already calculating implications for my modest fixed income. The requested amount would significantly impact my carefully balanced budget, potentially requiring liquidation of investments intended for emergency needs or eventual legacy purposes. More concerning than financial implications, however, was the transactional framing of what I had understood as mutually supportive family arrangement. I'll need some time to consider this and review my budget, I explained, maintaining composure despite the profound disappointment expanding in my chest. Perhaps we could discuss this further over the weekend after I've had opportunity to analyze my financial situation. Daniel appeared satisfied with this measured response, conversation shifting to upcoming neighborhood events with no acknowledgement of the fundamental relationship transformation his spreadsheet represented. Later that evening, alone in my suite, I reviewed financial resources with clearer understanding of my actual position within their household. Not family elder contributing through non-monetary means, but tenant expected to provide financial compensation for space occupied. The contrast between this arrangement and the values Robert and I had modeled throughout their childhood created painful recognition that something essential had been lost in Daniel's development. His professional success in financial services appeared to have gradually replaced our family's stewardship principles with transactional perspective applied even to parent-child relationships. Rather than immediate confrontation, I spent the following days in careful reflection and planning. My investment accounts, while modest, had been prudently managed with portions specifically designated for future healthcare needs or emergency circumstances. The senior living community where I had previously volunteered offered several independent apartment options within my sustainable budget range, particularly if supplemented through part-time work matching my educational background. Most importantly, this community embodied the values of mutual support and intergenerational connection that had shaped my understanding of meaningful life. Residents contributing skills and time rather than measuring relationships through financial transactions. Alone. The contrast with Daniel's spreadsheet approach could not have been more striking. 6 days after the rent proposal, having confirmed available housing options and reviewed financial viability, I presented my response at another family dinner. "I've considered your request carefully," I began, after Daniel inquired whether I'd made financial arrangements. "And I've concluded that your suggestion makes perfect sense. Our arrangement should indeed reflect appropriate boundaries and expectations." Daniel nodded approvingly, apparently interpreting my composed demeanor as acceptance of his terms. What followed surprised both him and Jennifer. Rather than adjusting my budget to accommodate rental payments, however, I've secured an apartment at Lakeside Gardens Senior Community, where I can maintain complete financial independence while contributing through their mutual support programs. I'll be moving next Tuesday. The announcement created momentary silence, followed by Daniel's carefully measured response. "That seems rather extreme, Mom. We weren't asking you to leave, just to contribute fairly to household expenses." "I understand," I replied with genuine calmness rather than reactive emotion. "And I appreciate the clarity your request provided. It helped me recognize that our understandings of family relationship and mutual support have evolved in different directions. I believe we'll all be more comfortable with arrangements that align with our actual values rather than assumed expectations." The conversation that followed revealed fundamental disconnection between Daniel's financial framework and the stewardship principles that had guided my life choices. His perspective framed family support as transaction requiring balanced monetary exchange, while my understanding emphasized mutual contribution through diverse means: wisdom, time, practical support, financial resources when appropriate, all flowing according to need rather than formal accounting. Dad would be disappointed by this decision, Daniel suggested as discussion reached impasse. He always emphasized responsible financial management. Your father valued prudent resource stewardship, I corrected gently, but always within context, of meaningful relationship and community care. The spreadsheet you created reflects different values. Not wrong, necessarily, but different from the family principles we attempted to model. My decision remained firm despite subsequent attempts to negotiate compromise arrangements. The following Tuesday, I moved into a modest but comfortable one-bedroom apartment within the vibrant senior community where I had previously volunteered. The transition represented not just physical relocation, but conscious recommitment to values that had guided my life journey, values seemingly diluted in my son's worldview despite our intentional parenting. What I couldn't have anticipated was how this transition would ultimately create opportunity for profound reconnection and values realignment, a development that would bring Daniel to my new doorstep exactly 1 week later, facing unexpected revelations about family legacy that transcended financial spreadsheets or property calculations. The conversation that would unfold that evening would transform our relationship in ways neither of us could have predicted when he first presented his rental expectation, opening possibility for genuine healing and renewed understanding of what stewardship truly means across generations. But that unexpected reconciliation emerged through circumstances I never could have engineered myself. The morning after moving into Lakeside Gardens, I awoke to sunlight streaming through windows unobscured by the towering oak trees that had surrounded Daniel and Jennifer's property. My new apartment, though modest in size, felt spacious in its possibility, a blank canvas representing freedom rather than diminishment. As I prepared a simple breakfast in my compact kitchen, I realized I had slept more soundly than during any night in my son's home. "How are you settling in, Margaret?" asked Eleanor Jacobson, the community's resident services coordinator, when I stopped by the main office to complete remaining paperwork. Eleanor had been instrumental in expediting my application process, recognizing the urgency behind my sudden housing transition. "Still finding places for everything," I admitted, "but already feeling at home in ways I hadn't expected." Eleanor nodded with understanding earned through years of supporting seniors through housing transitions. Many residents describe that exact experience, surprise at the sense of relief that comes with appropriate independence. Your volunteer work here gave you insight many new residents lack. Indeed, my previous volunteer involvement had provided valuable perspective on Lakeside Gardens' unique approach to senior living. Unlike traditional retirement communities focused primarily on amenities and services, this cooperative model emphasized mutual contribution and intergenerational connection. Residents participated according to their abilities and interests, teaching classes, maintaining gardens, providing transportation, sharing professional skills. The Tuesday morning financial literacy workshop still needs a regular facilitator, Eleanor mentioned as she filed my completed forms. Your background would be perfect if you're interested in continuing that volunteer role from a resident perspective. This immediate opportunity to contribute meaningfully struck sharp contrast with my status in Daniel's home, where my presence had been framed primarily as financial burden rather than valuable resource. "I'd be delighted to step into that role," I replied, grateful for the natural continuation of work that had given purpose during my condominium years. The following days established new rhythms surprisingly quickly. Mornings began with coffee in the community garden alongside neighbors who soon became friends. Frank Morrison, a retired history professor with a penchant for terrible puns, joined me regularly, our conversations ranging from current events to philosophical discussions about aging with intention. Afternoons often found me swimming gentle laps in the community pool or attending one of many resident-led classes, watercolor painting, tai chi, discussion groups exploring everything from poetry to politics. Most importantly, I resumed volunteer responsibilities teaching financial literacy. drawing on both professional background and personal experience to help fellow seniors navigate financial challenges from fixed income budgeting to avoiding predatory schemes targeting the elderly. The Tuesday morning workshop attracted participants ranging from recently widowed women unfamiliar with managing investments to retired professionals seeking peer conversation about changing economic landscapes. You present complex concepts with remarkable clarity, commented Harriet Stevens, a retired nurse who had recently lost her husband after 53 years of marriage. Thomas always handled our finances. I feel like I'm learning a new language at 78. Financial systems are just another language, I assured her, with vocabulary and grammar that anyone can learn with practice. The most important element is understanding your values and priorities. Technical details serve those larger purposes. This integration of values-based perspective with practical financial management had always characterized my approach, influenced by both Robert's pragmatic engineering mindset and my parents' emphasis on stewardship. Helping others navigate their resources according to their personal priorities provided meaningful continuation of lifelong work while simultaneously processing my own recent experience with Daniel. 4 days after moving, I received a text message from Jennifer asking whether I needed any additional items from their home. Her message carried formal politeness without warmth, transaction-oriented communication consistent with their household approach. I responded with equal politeness, confirming I had everything needed while expressing appreciation for her inquiry. Daniel's separate message arrived later that evening. Mom, we should discuss your investment accounts. Let me know when you're available for a portfolio review meeting. The request, noticeably lacking any inquiry about my well-being or adjustment to new circumstances, reinforced my growing understanding of how thoroughly financial perspective dominated his worldview. After thoughtful consideration, I responded that I would review my investment management approach in coming weeks and would contact him once I had clarified my preferences. This measured response reflected careful deliberation about appropriate boundaries moving forward. While Daniel's professional expertise remained valuable, recent events necessitated reconsideration of our financial entanglements. His firm managed my investment accounts, creating connection that now required evaluation alongside other aspects of our relationship. The catalyst for unexpected developments arrived the following morning in the form of a simple flyer posted on the community bulletin board. Legacy Planning Workshop, Beyond Financial Inheritance, announced the session scheduled for that afternoon, facilitated by Richard Harmon, an elder law attorney who regularly provided pro bono consultation to Lakeside residents. Though initially hesitant to engage with inheritance questions so soon after family disruption, something about the workshop description resonated with my current circumstances. Explore how values, stories, and meaningful objects can create more impactful legacy than financial assets alone. Practical approaches to documenting and sharing what truly matters across generations. The session, held in the community's sunlit meeting room, attracted about 15 residents ranging from early 60s to mid-90s. Richard Harmon, silver-haired but energetic, began with perspective that immediately captured my attention. Most conventional estate planning focuses almost exclusively on financial assets and property distribution, he explained. Yet research consistently shows that what descendants value most are not monetary inheritances, but rather wisdom, values, and meaningful objects connecting them to family history. Today, we'll explore practical methods for documenting and transmitting these non-financial legacies. The 2-hour workshop introduced various approaches to legacy preservation: ethical wills documenting values and life lessons, recorded oral histories, memory books combining photographs with written reflections, even digital archives preserving important family stories for future generations. Throughout the presentation, Richard emphasized how these approaches complemented, rather than replaced, traditional financial planning. Consider what specific wisdom or values you most want to transmit, he suggested during an interactive exercise. If future generations could understand just 3 principles that have guided your life, what would they be? How might those principles be conveyed through stories, objects, or documented experiences? This framing triggered immediate reflection on my relationship with Daniel. How despite deliberate modeling and explicit discussion of stewardship values throughout his upbringing, his professional immersion in financial services had seemingly overshadowed these foundational principles. Perhaps our approach had emphasized demonstration without sufficient explanation, assuming observed patterns would naturally transfer across generations without explicit documentation. After the workshop concluded, I remained behind to speak with Richard privately. The concept of ethical wills particularly resonates with me, I explained. I'm experiencing significant disconnect between the values my late husband and I attempted to instill in our children and how those values are currently being expressed, particularly regarding care relationships and resource stewardship. Richard nodded with understanding that suggested familiarity with such disconnections. Family values transmission often experiences unexpected distortions across generations, particularly in culture emphasizing financial metrics over relationship quality. Would you find it helpful to discuss your specific situation in more detail? I maintain regular consultation hours for residents. The following morning, I met with Richard in the small conference room adjacent to the community library. After briefly explaining my recent experience with Daniel, from the home transfer to condominium sale to his eventual rental demand, I expressed my fundamental concern about values misalignment rather than merely financial disagreement. The spreadsheet approach to family relationships troubles me far more than the specific dollar amount, I explained. It suggests completely different understanding of familial obligation and intergenerational support than what we attempted to model throughout his childhood. Richard considered this thoughtfully before responding. This disconnect appears at the intersection of relationship expectations and resource stewardship, precisely where values clarification becomes essential. While we can't control how others interpret family obligations, we can document our own intentional approach to legacy, creating opportunity for future recalibration. Our conversation expanded beyond immediate family dynamics to broader questions of meaningful legacy. Richard shared examples from other families who had successfully navigated similar disconnections through intentional documentation and conversation rather than reactive separation. He introduced specific tools for creating comprehensive legacy statements, integrating financial decisions with their underlying values and intentions. The goal isn't controlling others' choices, he emphasized, but rather ensuring your intentions and values are clearly expressed so misinterpretation becomes less likely. This clarity often opens space for meaningful reconsideration, particularly when momentary tensions eventually subside. This perspective, focusing on clear communication of values rather than enforcing specific behaviors, resonated deeply with my educational background and parenting philosophy. Perhaps Daniel's current approach reflected incomplete understanding rather than rejection of our family values, creating possibility for reconnection through more explicit conversation about the principles underlying financial decisions. As our consultation concluded, Richard made unexpected suggestion that would ultimately prove transformative. Lakeside Gardens has recently established a community foundation addressing local housing security needs. Given your background in financial literacy education and apparent commitment to housing accessibility, you might find their mission aligns with your values. They're hosting an information session tomorrow evening if you're interested in learning more. This casual recommendation led me to attend the presentation the following evening, where I discovered initiative directly connecting with both professional expertise and personal values. The Lakeside Community Housing Foundation had been established through collaborative effort between residents and local leaders, focusing specifically on preventing senior housing displacement and providing emergency assistance to families facing eviction or foreclosure. We're particularly seeking volunteers with financial literacy background, explained Sophia Martinez, the Foundation's program director, when I introduced myself after the presentation. Many situations can be addressed through timely intervention and structured planning, particularly when households receive guidance before reaching crisis stage. The Foundation's approach, preventative education combined with emergency assistance when necessary, perfectly complemented my teaching experience, while addressing needs I recognized from both professional and personal perspective. The opportunity to contribute meaningful skills in context-valuing experience over age felt particularly significant after recent family dynamics. I'd like to volunteer regularly, I told Sophia. My background includes 15 years teaching financial literacy through community extension programs, along with curriculum development for senior-specific financial management workshops. Sophia's eyes widened at this information. We've actually been trying to develop comprehensive curriculum addressing exactly those needs. Would you be willing to consult on program development alongside direct service? This invitation to contribute, at both implementation and design levels, represented precisely the valued engagement I had missed during months in Daniel's home. Rather than being viewed as financial liability requiring spreadsheet calculation, my experience and abilities were recognized as valuable assets worthy of development. The contrast could not have been more stark or healing. Over the following days, I divided time between settling into my apartment, leading the Tuesday financial literacy workshop, and consulting with the Housing Foundation. This balanced activity filled my days with purpose, while evenings often included social engagement with new neighbors, community meals, film discussions, occasional concerts featuring local musicians. The richness of this independent life contrasted sharply with increasingly strained messages from Daniel, who seemed unable to comprehend my preference for modest apartment over their luxury home. The market had another down day, read his latest text. We should really discuss rebalancing your portfolio. These decisions impact potential inheritance planning. The continued emphasis on financial considerations without acknowledgement of relationship dimensions reinforced my confidence in establishing appropriate boundaries. While I responded civilly, confirming eventual discussion of investment strategies, I maintained space for further reflection about our relationship's appropriate structure moving forward. The unanticipated catalyst for transformation arrived 6 days after my move, through conversation with Richard, following my participation in the Housing Foundation's committee meeting. Your contribution to the emergency assistance guidelines was invaluable, he commented as we walked together toward the residential building. Your perspective on distinguishing between immediate crisis intervention and longer-term stability planning added important dimension to our approach. It draws on experience from both professional background and personal circumstances, I acknowledged. Watching families navigate housing insecurity during my teaching years provided insight into both financial and emotional dimensions of housing transitions. Richard nodded thoughtfully before making observation that would unexpectedly reshape my understanding of recent events. The Foundation recently received significant donation earmarked specifically for senior housing security, an anonymous contribution that will substantially expand our prevention programs. The timing seems almost synchronistic given your recent situation. Anonymous donation? I inquired, curious about this development. Yes, quite substantial. Designated specifically for supporting seniors facing housing insecurity due to family circumstances. Particularly interesting timing considering your recent experience. Something in his tone suggested broader understanding than our limited conversations would explain. When I asked directly about this apparent connection, Richard hesitated briefly before responding. I should perhaps mention that the donor specifically referenced being inspired by learning about a 74-year-old mother facing housing transition after family members imposed rental requirements. The parallels seemed too specific to be coincidental. This revelation created immediate questions about confidentiality and how personal details might have circulated within the community. I've shared my situation with very few people, I noted with concern. I'm uncomfortable thinking my private circumstances might have become public knowledge. Richard's response provided unexpected clarity. The donation came 3 days ago, specifically after the foundation's needs were mentioned during our community dinner discussion. Catherine Wilson made the contribution shortly after that conversation. Catherine Wilson? I repeated, momentarily confused until understanding dawned. My daughter Catherine? Richard nodded confirmation. She indicated she'd recently learned about your housing transition from her brother and wanted to support organizations addressing similar situations. While maintaining your privacy, she explained that family circumstances had given her new appreciation for challenges seniors face when family support systems change unexpectedly. This revelation stunned me into momentary silence. Catherine was currently stationed in eastern Kenya, coordinating medical services for refugee populations displaced by regional conflict. Our communication had been limited to occasional video calls when satellite connections permitted. According to Foundation records, she's currently in Chicago for specialized training before returning to Kenya. She's scheduled to visit our community tomorrow evening to discuss potential partnerships between our housing initiatives and international medical programs. This information, that Catherine was not only aware of my situation but actively responding through meaningful action, shifted my understanding of family dynamics significantly. Rather than isolated conflict between Daniel and myself, the situation now included Catherine's engaged perspective, potentially creating opportunity for more comprehensive family recalibration. That evening, I composed careful email to Catherine, expressing appreciation for her support of the Housing Foundation while requesting opportunity to discuss recent developments personally. Her response arrived within hours despite the late timing. Mom, I've been trying to reach you since Daniel called with his twisted version of events. Just landed in Chicago yesterday for emergency medicine certification. Hoping to see you tomorrow. At Lakeside, so much to discuss. Love you always, C. The message's warmth and clear positioning contrasted sharply with Daniel's transaction-focused communications, suggesting Catherine's values. Alignment remained closer to what Robert and I had attempted to instill. This realization brought both comfort and heightened anticipation for our upcoming conversation. What I couldn't have anticipated was how Catherine's arrival the following evening would catalyze the dramatic confrontation and resolution that had been building since my departure from Daniel's home. When the lobby attendant called to announce visitors, plural rather than singular, I experienced momentary confusion until stepping into the community room to find both my children waiting. Catherine stood near the window, still dressed in the professional attire she must have worn to her certification training, her expression brightening immediately upon seeing me. Beside her, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the modest surroundings, stood Daniel, his presence completely unexpected given our limited communication since my departure. Mom! Catherine moved quickly to embrace me, her characteristic warmth unchanged despite years working in crisis situations. You look wonderful. Somehow younger than when I saw you last summer. Independence agrees with me, I replied, returning her embrace while acknowledging Daniel with measured nod. This is an unexpected surprise. I wasn't expecting both of you. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his usual confident demeanor notably subdued. Catherine insisted we come together, he explained with uncharacteristic hesitation. After our conversation earlier today, she felt it was important. The reference to prior conversation between my children suggested significant developments behind this unexpected joint visit. Catherine confirmed this impression with her direct approach, suggesting we move to my apartment for privacy rather than continuing discussion in the community area. We have important family matters to address, she explained, her tone combining professional directness with personal warmth. And I believe they're best discussed where you feel most comfortable, Mom. My apartment, though modest, had already taken on personal character through thoughtful arrangement of meaningful possessions. Robert's favorite reading chair positioned by the window, family photographs displayed on bookshelves alongside volumes, We had collected throughout our marriage the handmade quilt from my mother spread across the sofa. These touchstones of continuity within new surroundings created visual representation of my current life transition, honoring history while embracing necessary change. "Your place looks great, Mom," Catherine observed genuinely as we settled in the living area. "It feels like you, warm and thoughtfully arranged." Daniel remained standing, surveying the apartment with expressions suggesting internal calculation, likely comparing square footage and amenities to his own home specifications. "It's functional," he offered finally, selecting chair furthest, from where Catherine and I had naturally positioned ourselves. "It's exactly what I need," I corrected gently. "Appropriate scale, manageable maintenance, and most importantly, consistent with my values regarding resource stewardship." This reference to values created opening Catherine immediately utilized. "That's precisely why we're here," she stated, addressing both Daniel and myself, "to discuss family values and how they're currently being expressed through our relationships and resource decisions." The directness of this framing, reminiscent of Robert's approach to important family discussions, signaled Catherine's intention to address substantive issues rather than maintain polite pretenses. Her professional experience managing crisis situations had clearly strengthened her natural forthrightness. "I understand you've made substantial anonymous donation to the Housing Foundation here," I acknowledged, creating bridge between her foundation support and current conversation. "Yes, after learning about your situation," she confirmed, gaze shifting meaningfully toward Daniel, who visibly tensed. Though Daniel's version differed significantly from what I've since discovered through the foundation director. "Perhaps we should begin by establishing exactly what transpired between you." This invitation to clarify recent events created pivotal opportunity for direct communication without accusatory framing. I described the progression from initial housing transitions through the eventual spreadsheet presentation and rental requirement, focusing on factual sequence rather than emotional impact. When presented with requirement for monthly payment, I recognized fundamental misalignment between my understanding of family relationships and Daniel's apparent perspective, I concluded. Rather than creating ongoing tension through incompatible expectations, I chose independent living arrangement that allows appropriate boundaries while maintaining family connection. Throughout this account, Daniel's expression shifted between defensive justification and genuine discomfort. When I finished speaking, Catherine turned expectantly toward her brother, clearly waiting for his perspective. "It was never about the money specifically," he began after uncomfortable pause. "Jennifer and I simply felt it was important to establish clear financial boundaries. Many households with multi-generational arrangements implement similar structures." "Implementation approach matters significantly," Catherine observed. "From what Mom describes, you presented complex spreadsheet analyzing her presence primarily as financial consideration rather than family relationship. That framing reveals underlying values disconnect beyond specific dollar amount." This astute observation, identifying values misalignment as fundamental issue rather than merely financial disagreement, demonstrated Catherine's emotional intelligence alongside her professional directness. Daniel's response revealed how thoroughly he had internalized market-based approach to relationships. "Every relationship involves exchange of value," he argued with familiar professional tone. "I was simply making implicit expectations explicit through quantified analysis. That's actually more respectful than unspoken assumptions." "Exchange exists within all relationships," Catherine acknowledged. "But family exchanges operate through different principles than market transactions." The spreadsheet approach imposed market framework on family relationship, fundamentally altering its nature. This articulation, precisely identifying how financial analysis had replaced relationship understanding, expressed exactly what had troubled me about Daniel's approach. Catherine had captured the essence of my concern with remarkable clarity, likely drawing on both our shared family values and her experience navigating cultural differences in international humanitarian work. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, clearly, struggling to articulate his perspective within conversation, now addressing values rather than merely financial arrangements. "I was trying to be responsible," he insisted, "establishing sustainable structure that respected everyone's needs." "Which needs were being centered?" Catherine challenged gently. "Financial efficiency or relationship integrity? Market-based? Approaches prioritize different values than family-based systems." As this exchange continued, I observed significant shift occurring within the conversation dynamics. Rather than positioning me against Daniel in parental authority relationship, Catherine had established peer dialogue between adult siblings addressing fundamental values questions. This lateral approach proved remarkably effective, allowing Daniel to engage without defensive positioning against parental judgment. The financial services perspective becomes pervasive when you're immersed in it daily, Daniel admitted after Catherine shared parallel from her medical experience navigating different cultural systems. You begin seeing everything through that analytical framework without realizing how it reshapes relationships. This acknowledgement, recognizing how professional immersion had transformed his perspective, represented first significant breakthrough in our family disconnection. Rather than defending his approach as objectively correct, Daniel had acknowledged subjective influence shaping his perspective, creating possibility for reconsideration rather than entrenched opposition. Catherine built on this opening with remarkable skill, sharing how her international medical work required constant vigilance against imposing Western medical frameworks on communities with different healing traditions. The challenge isn't determining which system is universally correct, she explained, but rather recognizing when particular frameworks serve or undermine specific relationship contexts. As conversation deepened, Daniel gradually revealed underlying anxieties that had influenced his approach: concerns about professional expectations, peer comparisons regarding lifestyle choices, pressure to demonstrate successful resource management across all life dimensions. These revelations created new understanding of how his spreadsheet approach reflected not merely financial calculation, but response to complex social expectations within his professional community. Jennifer's colleagues all have formal arrangements with family members living in their homes, he explained, vulnerability replacing his usual confident assertions. The conversations always include specific financial contributions. I felt I wasn't properly managing our household without similar structure. This context, peer influence shaping his understanding of appropriate family arrangements, offered explanation without excusing impact. Catherine acknowledged this reality while gently challenging its alignment with deeper family values. Different communities operate through different relational expectations, she observed. The question becomes which community values we choose to prioritize in our family relationships. Throughout this exchange, I maintained supportive presence, without dominating the conversation, recognizing the powerful sibling dynamic unfolding between my children. When Daniel finally turned toward me directly, his expression reflected genuine reconsideration rather than strategic positioning. "I presented the spreadsheet without considering how it would feel from your perspective," he acknowledged, professional, facade completely absent from his tone. "Quantifying your presence through square footage and utility percentages completely missed the non-financial contributions you made to our household. I can see now how it transformed our relationship into transaction." This acknowledgement, recognizing the reductionist nature of his approach, represented significant emotional development, rather than merely strategic concession. Catherine reinforced this growth by sharing parallel from her medical practice. "We face similar challenges in healthcare whenever we reduce patients to diagnostic categories or statistical outcomes rather than whole persons with complex lives," she observed. "The efficiency seems necessary until we recognize what's lost through that reduction." As evening progressed into substantive family conversation, fundamental values questions emerged more explicitly than ever before in our adult relationships. What constitutes appropriate intergenerational support? How should resource stewardship balance present relationships with future security? When do professional frameworks enhance family dynamics versus undermining fundamental connections? The most significant revelation came when Catherine described discovering the context behind my housing transitions, learning from Housing Foundation staff about my having signed over the family home to Daniel years earlier, followed by condominium sale at his recommendation. When Daniel called claiming you had abandoned our childhood home for a substandard apartment, he never mentioned that you had transferred the house to him 3 years ago, she explained, still processing this information herself. Nor that the condominium sale happened at his suggestion, with proceeds invested through his firm. Daniel's expression revealed genuine shame at this characterization, recognition that his selective presentation to Catherine had constituted manipulation rather than honest communication. I was angry and confused by Mom's decision to leave, he admitted. My description to you wasn't fully accurate. This acknowledgement created opening for the most transformative moment of our conversation. Daniel's gradual recognition of how thoroughly financial perspective had reshaped his understanding of family relationship. As Catherine guided discussion toward underlying values rather than specific housing arrangements, profound shift occurred in his self-awareness. I've been managing Mom as asset rather than relating to her as parent, he acknowledged eventually, vulnerability replacing professional detachment. The spreadsheet approach wasn't aberration, but culmination of perspective, gradually replacing our family values with financial services framework. This recognition that values disconnect extended beyond specific rental proposal to fundamental relationship orientation created possibility for genuine recalibration rather than merely negotiated compromise. The conversation expanding to include broader legacy questions beyond financial inheritance, precisely the territory Richard's workshop had explored. As our evening together concluded, tentative plans emerged for family moving forward, not immediate resolution or superficial reconciliation, but commitment to ongoing conversation addressing substantive values alignment rather than merely practical arrangements. Daniel expressed genuine interest in the community housing foundation Catherine had supported, recognizing alignment with Robert's lifelong commitment to infrastructure serving community needs. Most significantly, Daniel acknowledged his spreadsheet approach had ultimately undermined exactly what he claimed to value: efficient resource management for meaningful impact. By reducing our relationship to financial transaction, I damaged family connection that matters more than any portfolio performance, he observed with remarkable self-awareness. That represents fundamental failure of stewardship by any meaningful standard. This recognition, that genuine stewardship encompasses relationships alongside resources, represented profound return to family values Robert and I had attempted to instill throughout their childhood. While single conversation couldn't resolve years of increasing disconnection, it established foundation for potential healing through honest communication rather than transaction-based interaction. When my children finally prepared to leave, Catherine, to her hotel near the medical center, Daniel to the home he now recognized differently, they embraced me with markedly different energy than when they had arrived. Catherine's hug carried familiar warmth alongside new respect for my independent choices. Daniel's embrace conveyed tentative reconnection replacing professional distance, genuine rather than perfunctory connection. I'd like to visit again next week, he said as they prepared to depart. Not to discuss investments or financial matters, but just to spend time together. Maybe you could show me around this community you've joined. This simple request, prioritizing relationship over financial management, represented profound shift from his previous communication focused exclusively on portfolio review and inheritance planning. His next words revealed even more significant transformation beginning to unfold. And I've been thinking about Dad's approach to community resources," he added with thoughtfulness replacing calculation. The housing foundation Catherine supported seems aligned with his values about infrastructure serving genuine needs. I'd like to learn more about their work. Maybe there's an appropriate way to honor his legacy through supporting their mission. This reference to legacy beyond financial inheritance, connecting to Robert's values through meaningful contribution, suggested potential healing extending beyond our immediate relationship to broader understanding of stewardship principles. Catherine reinforced this opening with characteristic directness. The foundation director mentioned upcoming board position opening that could benefit from financial expertise, she noted. Might be worth exploring if you're serious about reconnecting with Dad's approach to community resource development. As they departed together, siblings reconnecting through shared family values despite their different life paths, I recognized how completely tables had turned from just 1 week earlier. The spreadsheet that had quantified my presence as financial burden had inadvertently catalyzed profound reassessment of values across generations. My dependent status had been revealed as wisdom-carrying stewardship. His transaction-based approach had systematically devalued. Most significantly, my departure from Daniel's home had created possibility for authentic reconnection that remaining within his spreadsheet-defined terms would have prevented. By choosing alignment with my core values rather than accommodating his financial framework, I had ultimately opened space for genuine reconsideration rather than entrenched misalignment. The powerful community I had joined, organized around mutual contribution rather than financial transaction, had demonstrated alternative relationship model that challenged Daniel's assumed framework more effectively than any argument could have accomplished. Seeing me engaged and valued within this community created visceral understanding of what had been lost through his reduction of our relationship to financial calculation. As I prepared for bed that evening, I noticed text message from Catherine. "So proud of you, Mom. Your quiet dignity accomplished what arguments never could. Daniel's talking about family values again for first time in years. The real family inheritance is secure. Love you." This simple message captured exactly what had transpired through recent events. Not merely personal vindication or practical housing resolution, but fundamental reclamation of family legacy beyond financial assets. By embodying values rather than just discussing them, I had created space for their renewed appreciation across generations. The tables had indeed turned, not through manipulation or control, but through authentic alignment with core principles that ultimately spoke more powerfully than any spreadsheet analysis. The 74-year-old mother who had packed her belongings and left without argument had ultimately accomplished what years of discussion had never achieved: reconnection with the stewardship values that constituted our true family legacy. 1. Year after that pivotal evening when my children sat in my modest apartment discussing family values rather than financial transactions, I stood in the community garden of Lakeside Gardens, arranging flowers for the dedication ceremony scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. The autumn sunshine illuminated the newly constructed pavilion that would serve as both outdoor classroom space and gathering area for residents and local families participating in intergenerational programs. "Those dahlias are spectacular, Margaret," commented Eleanor Jacobson, now not just colleague but dear friend after months of collaborative work. "Your garden committee has transformed this entire area." I smiled, appreciating how this small plot of earth represented far more than just horticultural achievement. When I had volunteered to chair the garden committee 6 months earlier, the space had been functional but uninspiring. Basic plantings maintained by contracted landscapers with minimal resident involvement. Now it flourished with carefully planned seasonal beds, vegetable gardens providing produce for our community kitchen, and thoughtfully designed seating areas encouraging neighbors to linger and connect. "The transformation happened through many hands working together," I replied, adjusting an arrangement of deep burgundy blooms against golden chrysanthemums. "That's been the most rewarding aspect, seeing residents discover gardening talents they never knew they possessed." This observation applied to far more than just our garden project. Throughout my year at Lakeside, I had witnessed remarkable blooming among residents who discovered new purposes and unexpected abilities in their 7th and 8th decades. Frank Morrison, the retired history professor with terrible puns, had developed a popular lecture series exploring historical parallels to current events. Harriet Stevens, initially uncertain about managing her finances after her husband's death, now co-facilitated my financial literacy workshops, bringing valuable perspective from her journey toward confidence and independence. The Pavilion Dedication Committee is asking if you're ready for the final walkthrough, Eleanor noted, checking her watch. The donors will arrive in about 20 minutes. Everything's prepared, I assured her, making one final adjustment to the floral arrangements flanking the pavilion entrance. Catherine texted that their flight landed on time, so they should be here shortly. The mention of Catherine brought warm anticipation of seeing my daughter in person rather than through our regular video calls. Unlike previous years when her international medical work limited our time together to brief annual visits, she had created more intentional connection over the past 12 months, arranging schedules to include regular stays when returning to the United States for training or administrative responsibilities. More remarkable than Catherine's increased presence, however, was the transformation in Daniel's engagement with both family and community. The pavilion we would dedicate today represented tangible evidence of this evolution, a project he had initially approached with financial analysis, but gradually embraced with genuine commitment to its deeper purpose. The journey toward this moment had begun during that crucial evening in my apartment, when Catherine's skillful facilitation had created space for honest reassessment of values across generations. While that single conversation hadn't immediately resolved years of diverging perspectives, it had established foundation for intentional reconnection based on authentic understanding rather than obligatory interaction. Daniel's promised visit the following week had indeed materialized, though with palpable awkwardness as he navigated unfamiliar territory, both literally within Lakeside's campus and figuratively in relationship no longer defined by financial oversight. When I suggested tour of the community, his initial observations revealed lingering perspective focused primarily on material assessment. The facilities seem well maintained considering the moderate fee structure, he had commented while we walked past the community center. Though the amenities are obviously scaled back compared to premium retirement communities, the resources align perfectly with resident priorities, I had responded gently. Community connection and meaningful contribution opportunities matter more to most of us than premium amenities we would rarely use. This subtle reframing, shifting focus from amenities to alignment with values, represented approach I had consistently maintained throughout our gradual reconnection. Rather than directly challenging his market-based assessments, I had simply offered alternative perspective, emphasizing relationship quality and purpose over facility specifications or financial metrics. Our tour had concluded with introduction to Richard Harmon, who had intentionally engaged Daniel's financial expertise while simultaneously expanding conversation toward broader community impact considerations. We're currently exploring funding structures for intergenerational programming space, Richard had explained. Your professional perspective might offer valuable insights if you're interested in our planning process. This strategic invitation, acknowledging Daniel's professional capabilities while connecting them to community-focused application, had created bridge between his financial services framework and the values-based approach characteristic of Lakeside's operations. Rather than positioning these perspectives as oppositional, Richard had skillfully presented them as complementary when properly integrated. To my surprise and cautious delight, Daniel had expressed genuine interest in learning more about the Foundation's work. I'd be happy to review your funding models, he had offered, professional confidence balanced with newfound humility. Though I should probably understand your community impact priorities more thoroughly before offering financial suggestions. This simple acknowledgement that community priorities should shape financial approaches rather than reverse had signaled significant shift from the spreadsheet mentality that had reduced my presence in his home to calculated expense. While single conversation couldn't erase years of professional conditioning, it had created opening for gradual perspective expansion that would unfold over subsequent months. Daniel's initial involvement with the Housing Foundation had proceeded cautiously, occasional consultation regarding investment structures supplemented by regular updates when visiting me at Lakeside. Meanwhile, his personal interaction had gradually shifted from formal check-ins to more authentic connection, conversations expanding beyond financial considerations to include meaningful engagement with my current activities and relationships. "Your financial literacy program has waiting lists now?" he had asked during spring visit, genuine interest replacing professional assessment. What aspects resonate most with participants? This inquiry, focused on impact rather than metrics, had opened substantive discussion about how education, addressing practical needs, created foundation for dignity and independence among seniors navigating fixed-income challenges. Daniel had listened with unprecedented attentiveness, professional expertise temporarily set aside as he absorbed perspectives centering lived experience over theoretical analysis. The pivotal expansion had occurred 3 months after our initial confrontation, when Catherine's scheduled return to the United States coincided with Housing Foundation Board retreat. Her international medical experience had provided valuable perspective regarding community-based approaches to resource distribution, while Daniel's financial expertise offered practical implementation frameworks for ambitious programming expansions. The pavilion concept addresses multiple community needs simultaneously, Catherine had observed during planning session I had been invited to attend. Intergenerational programming space, weather-protected garden access for mobility-challenged residents, and community gathering area, all supporting relationship development alongside educational opportunities. Daniel, initially focused on funding mechanisms, had gradually engaged with these purpose-centered considerations. The multifunctional design actually creates economic efficiencies while serving diverse community purposes, he noted. Financial analysis now supporting values-based priorities rather than defining primary decision criteria. We could structure phased funding approach aligning donor priorities with incremental implementation. This integration, financial expertise serving community priorities rather than determining them, had represented significant evolution from his previous approach. When Foundation board member had subsequently resigned due to health concerns, Richard's invitation to Daniel to fill the vacancy had created opportunity for more formal involvement, connecting professional capabilities with meaningful purpose. The position requires significant time commitment, Richard had cautioned when extending the invitation. Our board members actively engage with program implementation, rather than simply providing oversight. Daniel's response had revealed continuing transformation in his approach to resource allocation, both professional and personal. "I've been reassessing my time investments recently," he acknowledged thoughtfully, realizing certain professional obligations expand to fill available space without providing proportional meaning. "This work aligns with values I want to prioritize more intentionally." The reference to intentional values alignment, language, notably absent from our interactions prior to confrontation, had signaled significant recalibration in his life orientation. While maintaining successful financial services career, he had begun creating deliberate boundaries around professional obligations to accommodate growing commitment to community-focused engagement. This evolution had become increasingly evident through practical changes in his approach to schedule management. Rather than limiting visits to Lakeside around business trips or professional obligations, he had begun arranging professional responsibilities to accommodate regular community involvement, adjusting client meetings to allow participation in foundation initiatives, occasionally working remotely to extend time in the area. Jennifer's participation had evolved more gradually, her initial skepticism about Daniel's community involvement shifting toward cautious engagement as she observed changes in his satisfaction and overall well-being. "He seems more grounded now," she acknowledged during summer visit where she had finally toured Lakeside's campus. More like the person I met before his career became all-consuming. This observation, connecting current evolution with earlier, authentic self, rather than portraying completely new development, had provided important perspective on Daniel's journey. Perhaps the spreadsheet approach had represented temporary deviation rather than genuine values, transformation, professional immersion temporarily overshadowing foundational principles that remained accessible through intentional reconnection. Catherine's consistent involvement had further strengthened this family realignment, her international schedule now intentionally coordinating with foundation initiatives during stateside returns. Despite maintaining demanding medical career addressing crisis needs globally, she had created deliberate space for family connection and community contribution during transition periods between international assignments. The medical response framework translates surprisingly well to housing security initiatives, she observed during planning session for emergency assistance programs. Both require immediate stabilization, followed by structured support toward sustainable solutions, with success measured through restored independence rather than continued service provision. This perspective, emphasizing independence as outcome rather than service delivery as measure, aligned perfectly with Lakeside's approach, while simultaneously reinforcing values Robert and I had emphasized throughout our children's upbringing. Hearing Catherine articulate these principles within professional context had created powerful continuity between generations, values transmission, manifesting through evolved application rather than identical implementation. The Pavilion Project had emerged from these collaborative conversations, identified as priority addressing multiple community needs while creating space for expanded intergenerational programming. What began as modest proposal had evolved through iterative planning, eventually incorporating educational kitchen facilities alongside flexible gathering space and weather-protected garden access. Most remarkable had been Daniel's evolution from financial consultant to engaged champion as the project developed. His initial involvement, reviewing funding structures and investment approaches, had gradually expanded to include regular participation in planning committee meetings, site visits with architects, and eventually personal financial commitment, alongside his professional guidance. The funding gap between foundation resources and complete implementation is approximately $80,000, he had noted during critical planning phase. Jennifer and I would like to provide that amount as dedicated contribution, allowing immediate construction rather than phased implementation. This financial commitment, significant but not performatively excessive, had reflected thoughtful stewardship rather than status demonstration. More meaningful than the amount had been the intention behind it, expressed when Catherine asked about their decision to support this specific initiative. Dad would have appreciated the practical infrastructure meeting genuine community needs, Daniel explained, referencing Robert's engineering perspective in language noticeably aligned with original family values. Creating space where generations connect around shared purposes while supporting independence and dignity, that represents meaningful legacy beyond financial assets alone. This articulation, connecting financial resources with values-based impact, had demonstrated profound integration of perspectives previously positioned as oppositional. Rather than prioritizing either financial management or relationship values, Daniel had begun discovering how intentional alignment created more meaningful outcomes than either framework could achieve in isolation. The pavilion's physical construction, over recent months, had paralleled continued relationship reconstruction within our family. Regular project updates became natural opportunities for substantive connection beyond obligatory check-ins, conversations evolving from project logistics to deeper reflections about purpose and meaning across generations. I've been thinking about Dad's approach to city infrastructure projects, Daniel reflected during site visit watching foundation installation. How he emphasized considering maintenance requirements and accessibility alongside initial construction, designing for dignity in daily interaction rather than just impressive specifications. Those considerations seem relevant here too. These connections, linking current initiatives with Robert's principles, created continuity that neither denied personal evolution nor rejected foundational values. Rather than choosing between financial, expertise, and relationship priorities, Daniel had gradually discovered integration that enhanced both dimensions through meaningful alignment. Today's dedication ceremony would formalize the pavilion's completion while celebrating the collaborative process behind its creation. As I adjusted final floral arrangements, familiar voices drew my attention toward the garden entrance where Catherine and Daniel now approached together, engaged in animated conversation that paused as they noticed me. "Mom," Catherine accelerated, toward warm embrace that carried both professional strength and personal tenderness. "The pavilion looks absolutely beautiful, even better than the architectural renderings suggested." Daniel followed more measured pace, his expression reflecting genuine appreciation rather than property assessment as he surveyed the completed structure. "The integration with existing landscape is remarkable," he observed, architectural elements, clearly secondary to human-centered design in his evaluation. "It feels like natural extension of the community rather than imposed addition." This observation, prioritizing integration over impression, demonstrated continuing evolution in his perspective. Before I could respond, additional voices announced Jennifer's arrival with their children, 10-year-old Sophia and 8-year-old Thomas, who had begun accompanying their parents on regular visits to Lakeside over recent months. "Grandma," Thomas called, breaking away to reach me first. "Can we see the vegetable garden? Dad said you grew pumpkins bigger than my head." This simple interaction, genuine excitement about shared activity rather than obligatory greeting, represented one of many small reconciliations emerging through regular connection. Unlike previous years when grandchildren's visits had felt like scheduled obligations, recent months had developed authentic relationships through consistent engagement in meaningful activities rather than performative family gatherings. The garden committee saved harvesting those pumpkins specifically for today, I assured him, accepting enthusiastic hug before greeting Sophia with equal warmth. "After the ceremony, you can help prepare them for the community kitchen. They'll become soup for tomorrow's dinner." Jennifer approached with genuine, if still somewhat reserved greeting, her gradual engagement reflecting slower but steady evolution in our relationship. While our connection would likely never carry the same warmth characterizing other family bonds, mutual respect had replaced transactional assessment in our interactions. "The event planning committee has done remarkable work," she acknowledged, genuine appreciation replacing her previous tendency toward comparative evaluation. "Thomas has talked about nothing else all week, especially the intergenerational cooking program you mentioned during our last visit." This reference to future programming, grandchildren participating in activities alongside seniors, represented significant shift from previous family engagement, limited primarily to holiday obligations. The pavilion would create space for regular, intergenerational activities connecting residents with local families, relationship development occurring through meaningful shared experiences rather than obligatory visits. As foundation board members and community leaders began arriving for the ceremony, Daniel drew me aside for a moment of private conversation. "Before everything gets busy," he began with uncharacteristic hesitation, "I wanted to share something important with you." His expression, combining vulnerability with resolution, suggested significant communication beyond ordinary update. "Jennifer and I have been discussing potential housing changes," he continued carefully. "Our current property requires substantial maintenance alongside significant tax obligation. We're considering downsizing to something more aligned with our actual needs rather than status expectations." This consideration, prioritizing appropriate scale over impressive specifications, represented remarkable evolution from previous emphasis on luxury amenities and status signaling. Before responding, I waited patiently, sensing additional dimension to this communication beyond practical housing considerations. The Housing Foundation work has prompted significant reflection about what constitutes genuine security and meaningful legacy, he acknowledged, professional language now carrying personal application. The hours maintaining property that primarily impresses colleagues rather than serves genuine needs increasingly feels inconsistent with values I want to prioritize. This recognition that status-oriented choices often conflict with deeper values reflected ongoing recalibration extending beyond our specific relationship to broader life orientation. Rather than offering direct guidance, I simply acknowledged the thoughtful reflection behind his consideration. Finding alignment between daily choices and core values creates remarkable freedom, I observed. Your father discovered that through his municipal engineering career, choosing meaningful impact over prestigious private sector opportunities that might have provided greater financial return but less purposeful contribution. Daniel nodded thoughtfully, connection with his father's choices clearly resonating with current considerations. I've been reviewing some of Dad's project documentation from the municipal archives, he shared. The community center design principles from 30 years ago apply surprisingly well to current housing accessibility challenges. His emphasis on dignity and daily interaction, rather than merely technical compliance, seems particularly relevant. This engagement with Robert's professional legacy, connecting past principles with present application, represented healing dimension beyond our immediate relationship. By reconnecting with his father's approach to resource stewardship within professional context, Daniel had discovered continuity that honored evolution while maintaining core values connection. Our conversation paused as Richard approached, indicating ceremony preparations were complete. As guests took their places before the pavilion entrance, I observed the remarkable gathering representing multiple dimensions of community connection. Lakeside residents alongside local families, foundation supporters beside program participants, professional partners next to volunteer contributors. The ceremony itself balanced formal acknowledgement with genuine celebration, recognition of financial contributions alongside appreciation for countless volunteer hours that had transformed architectural plans into community reality. When Richard invited Daniel and Catherine forward as principal donors, their brief remarks reflected perfectly integrated perspective that would have made their father proud. This pavilion represents far more than physical structure, Catherine observed, professional authority balanced with personal warmth. It creates space where wisdom and experience can flow between generations, where stories and skills transfer through meaningful interaction rather than abstract instruction. Daniel continued seamlessly, financial expertise now serving human-centered purpose rather than defining primary value. The investment represented here will generate returns measured not through market appreciation, but through strengthened community bonds and expanded human capability. That represents authentic sustainability, transcending quarterly performance metrics. This integrated presentation, each contributing distinct perspective toward shared understanding, demonstrated profound healing from the disconnection that had characterized our family dynamics just 1 year earlier. Rather than operating from competing frameworks, my children had discovered complementary approaches serving common values despite their different professional paths. As ceremony concluded and community reception began, I found myself surrounded by conversation representing multiple threads of connection woven through recent months. Harriet Stevens described upcoming expansion of financial literacy workshops, incorporating Catherine's insights from international contexts. Richard discussed potential board position with Jennifer, whose event planning experience offered valuable perspective for community engagement initiatives. Daniel outlined internship opportunities for local students interested in learning both financial management and community development principles. Throughout these interactions, I maintained quiet, pride in transformation unfolding beyond my direct guidance. The confrontation that might have permanently fractured family connection had instead catalyzed authentic recalibration, precisely because it created space for genuine values expression rather than compromised accommodation. Frank Morrison captured This perfectly during momentary conversation gap, his philosophical observation balanced with characteristic humor. The most effective revolutions happen not through dramatic overthrow, but through quiet demonstration of better alternatives, he noted. Your dignified departure accomplished what arguments never could, creating space for authentic reconsideration rather than defended positions. This assessment, recognizing power in principled action beyond persuasive argument, articulated what I had intuitively understood when packing my belongings that pivotal day in Daniel's home. By choosing alignment with core values rather than accommodating misaligned expectations, I had ultimately created opportunity for genuine reconnection beyond temporary reconciliation. The afternoon unfolded through natural conversation groups, forming and reforming across generations. My grandchildren gathering garden vegetables alongside elder residents, Catherine discussing international health initiatives with local medical students, Daniel reviewing foundation investment approaches with potential donors. These interactions flowed without orchestration, authentic engagement replacing obligatory participation that had characterized previous family gatherings. As evening approached and formal reception concluded, our family gathered in my apartment for private dinner prepared in my modest kitchen now filled with comfortable familial energy. Unlike previous meals characterized by performance and evaluation, conversation flowed through meaningful topics balanced with genuine enjoyment of present moment. We've been discussing possible timing for my next international assignment, Catherine mentioned as we enjoyed simple meal around my small dining table. The Kenya project concludes next month, with potential new initiative developing in Central America. The Foundation Board suggested potential collaboration integrating housing, security principles with community health infrastructure. Daniel engaged with this professional update through genuinely supportive perspective rather than comparative assessment. That timing aligns well with the Foundation's strategic planning cycle, he noted. Your international perspective would strengthen our approach significantly, particularly as we consider expanding programming beyond immediate crisis intervention toward sustainable community development. This collaborative engagement, each appreciating the other's distinct contribution toward shared values, represented remarkable healing from previous disconnection when Daniel had dismissed Catherine's international work as idealistic lacking practical stability. Current conversation acknowledged different implementation approaches while recognizing common underlying principles. Most striking throughout evening was natural inclusion of my perspective alongside professional expertise. My children brought from their respective fields. Rather than polite acknowledgement of obligatory maternal presence, family discussion incorporated my experience and wisdom as valuable contribution within collaborative exploration rather than hierarchical guidance. When grandchildren eventually settled on living room floor with board games Jennifer had thoughtfully brought, adult conversation shifted toward more personal reflections on changes unfolding through recent months. Catherine described how regular connection with Lakeside's community had influenced her international approach to intergenerational program development. Jennifer acknowledged how Thomas and Sophia had developed notable confidence and empathy through regular interaction with elder residents during weekend visits. Daniel's reflection proved most revealing about transformation extending beyond specific family dynamics to fundamental life orientation. I've been reassessing career trajectory. Recently, he shared with uncharacteristic vulnerability. The partnership track I've pursued so aggressively involves increasing client load, requiring constant availability and performance metrics, emphasizing portfolio size over relationship quality. This reconsideration, questioning professional path previously presented as unequivocal success, represented significant evolution from achievement-focused orientation that had characterized his approach since early adulthood. Rather than immediate career abandonment or dramatic redirection, however, his consideration demonstrated mature integration balancing established expertise with evolving priorities. I'm exploring potential shift toward specialized practice focusing specifically on legacy planning beyond tax optimization, he explained thoughtfully, working with clients interested in meaningful impact, aligned with personal values, rather than merely maximizing financial returns or minimizing tax obligations. Smaller client base with deeper engagement rather than continuous expansion with superficial interaction. This potential redirection, maintaining professional expertise while reorienting toward values-aligned application, demonstrated sophisticated integration rather than reactive rejection. Neither abandoning financial services expertise nor remaining captured by its market-based framework, Daniel was discovering potential alignment between professional capabilities and personal values previously positioned as separate dimensions. That sounds similar to Dad's eventual municipal engineering role, Catherine observed insightfully. Specialized expertise serving community-focused projects rather than pursuing maximum financial returns through private sector advancement. He seemed genuinely satisfied with that integration despite occasional comments from colleagues about underutilizing his capabilities. This connection, linking Daniel's potential redirection with Robert's intentional professional choices, created powerful continuity across generations. Rather than positioning current consideration as rejection of father's influence, this framing recognized deeper alignment with values, principles underlying specific implementation choices. As evening concluded and family prepared to depart for hotel accommodations, Daniel lingered briefly for final private conversation. "I've been meaning to tell you something important," he began, characteristic confidence temporarily replaced by genuine humility. "When I presented that spreadsheet a year ago, I was operating from completely inadequate understanding of genuine stewardship." This acknowledgement, direct rather than implied, addressed our fundamental disconnection with remarkable clarity. Rather than general apology or vague recognition, Daniel specifically identified values misalignment that had created painful confrontation and subsequent transformation. Financial stewardship represents important dimension of resource management, he continued thoughtfully, but completely fails as comprehensive framework for relationship or legacy considerations. The spreadsheet approach reduced complex family relationship to transaction, missing entire dimensions of mutual contribution impossible to quantify through market metrics. This articulation, precisely identifying limitation in perspective rather than merely acknowledging hurt feelings, demonstrated profound growth beyond superficial reconciliation. Daniel had not simply adapted behavior to maintain relationship, but genuinely reconsidered fundamental framework shaping his understanding of family obligation and intergenerational connection. Dad's approach balanced financial responsibility alongside relationship investment and community contribution, he observed, connecting current understanding with parental modeling previously overshadowed by professional immersion. The municipal pension provided less immediate compensation than private sector opportunities, but created space for meaningful family engagement and community involvement that now represents his most enduring legacy. This recognition that legacy transcends financial metrics through relationship quality and community impact represented genuine restoration of values principles Robert and I had attempted to instill throughout our parenting journey. Rather than rejection of financial responsibility, Daniel had discovered its appropriate integration within comprehensive stewardship, extending beyond spreadsheet calculation to meaningful relationship investment. "I'm still learning how to balance these dimensions effectively," he acknowledged with refreshing self-awareness. The professional environment constantly reinforces market-based metrics as primary success indicators. Maintaining different perspective requires intentional counterpressure through regular community engagement and meaningful relationship investment. This ongoing tension, acknowledging continuing challenge rather than claiming complete transformation, demonstrated authentic maturity rather than performative conversion. Daniel had not abandoned financial expertise, but discovered its proper place within broader values framework, professional capabilities now serving relationship priorities rather than defining them. As we concluded this meaningful exchange with genuine embrace, I recognized the tables had indeed turned, not through manipulation or control, but through steadfast alignment with core values that eventually inspired authentic reconsideration rather than defended justification. By choosing dignified independence over compromised accommodation, I had ultimately created space for relationship renewal beyond what confrontation or argumentation could have accomplished. 1 year after packing my belongings and leaving Daniel's home without argument, my modest apartment had become gathering place for integrated family connection I could never have engineered through strategic maneuvering or emotional appeal. The pavilion dedicated today represented physical manifestation of values, realignment, extending beyond reconciled relationship to meaningful community impact. As Catherine had texted during pivotal confrontation evening, "The real family inheritance is secure." Through painful disconnection and subsequent healing, we had discovered truth transcending financial assets or property considerations. Legacy measured through values transmission and relationship quality, rather than portfolio performance or estate valuation. The tables had turned not through revocation of maternal love, but through its most authentic expression, maintaining unwavering commitment to core principles that ultimately spoke more powerfully than any argument could articulate. By embodying values rather than merely discussing them, I had created space for their renewed appreciation across generations. The 74-year-old mother who had quietly departed rather than compromise foundational principles had ultimately turned tables through dignified demonstration rather than dramatic confrontation. The spreadsheet quantifying my presence as financial burden had inadvertently catalyzed profound reassessment, eventually revealing what genuine stewardship truly encompasses. Legacy measured through lives touched rather than assets transferred. Meaningful impact rather than market valuation. As I prepared for bed that evening, Margaret Wilson at 75, I recognized deeper wisdom in my mother's lesson from childhood. The true wealth of a community is measured by how it supports its most vulnerable members. By choosing community valuing contribution over household calculating cost, I had ultimately facilitated family healing that quarterly statements and investment returns could never have accomplished. The tables had indeed turned transformation, flowing from authentic principle rather than strategic manipulation. In leaving without argument, I had ultimately created space for reconnection beyond what remaining could ever have achieved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. This reconsideration, questioning professional path previously presented as unequivocal success, represented significant evolution from achievement-focused orientation that had characterized his approach since early adulthood, rather than immediate career abandonment or dramatic redirection. However, his consideration demonstrated mature integration, balancing established expertise with evolving priorities. I'm exploring potential shift towards specialized practice, focusing specifically on legacy planning beyond tax optimization, he explained thoughtfully. Working with clients interested in meaningful impact aligned with personal values rather than merely maximizing financial returns or minimizing tax obligations. Smaller client base with deeper engagement rather than continuous expansion with superficial interaction. This potential redirection, maintaining professional expertise while reorienting toward values-aligned application, demonstrated sophisticated integration rather than reactive rejection. Neither abandoning financial services expertise nor remaining captured by its market-based framework, Daniel was discovering potential alignment between professional capabilities and personal values previously positioned as separate dimensions. That sounds similar to Dad's eventual municipal engineering role, Catherine observed insightfully. Specialized expertise serving community-focused projects rather than pursuing maximum financial returns through private sector advancement. He seemed genuinely satisfied with that integration, despite occasional comments from colleagues about underutilizing his capabilities. This connection, linking Daniel's potential redirection with Robert's intentional professional choices, created powerful continuity across generations. Rather than positioning current consideration as rejection of father's influence, this framing recognized deeper alignment with values principles underlying specific implementation choices. As evening concluded and family prepared to depart for hotel accommodations, Daniel lingered briefly for final private conversation. "I've been meaning to tell you something important," he began, characteristic confidence temporarily replaced by genuine humility. "When I presented that spreadsheet a year ago, I was operating from completely inadequate understanding of genuine stewardship." This acknowledgement, direct rather than implied, addressed our fundamental disconnection with remarkable clarity. Rather than general apology or vague recognition, Daniel specifically identified values misalignment that had created painful confrontation and subsequent transformation. "Financial stewardship represents important dimension of resource management," he continued thoughtfully, "but completely fails as comprehensive framework for relationship or legacy considerations." The spreadsheet approach reduced complex family relationship to transaction, missing entire dimensions of mutual contribution impossible to quantify through market metrics. This articulation, precisely identifying limitation in perspective rather than merely acknowledging hurt feelings, demonstrated profound growth beyond superficial reconciliation. Daniel had not simply adapted behavior to maintain relationship, but genuinely reconsidered fundamental framework shaping his understanding of family obligation and intergenerational connection. Dad's approach balanced financial responsibility alongside relationship investment and community contribution, he observed, connecting current understanding with parental modeling previously overshadowed by professional immersion. The municipal pension provided less immediate compensation than private sector opportunities, but created space for meaningful family engagement and community involvement that now represents his most enduring legacy. This recognition that legacy transcends financial metrics through relationship quality and community impact represented genuine restoration of values principles Robert and I had attempted to instill throughout our parenting journey. Rather than rejection of financial responsibility, Daniel had discovered its appropriate integration within comprehensive stewardship, extending beyond spreadsheet calculation to meaningful relationship investment. "I'm still learning how to balance these dimensions effectively," he acknowledged with refreshing self-awareness. The professional environment constantly reinforces market-based metrics as primary success indicators. Maintaining different perspective requires intentional counterpressure through regular community engagement and meaningful relationship investment. This ongoing tension, acknowledging continuing challenge rather than claiming complete transformation, demonstrated authentic maturity rather than performative conversion. Daniel had not abandoned financial expertise, but discovered its proper place within broader values framework, professional capabilities now serving relationship priorities rather than defining them. As we concluded this meaningful exchange with genuine embrace, I recognized the tables had indeed turned, not through manipulation or control, but through steadfast alignment with core values that eventually inspired authentic reconsideration rather than defended justification. By choosing dignified independence over compromised accommodation, I had ultimately created space for relationship renewal beyond what confrontation or argumentation could have accomplished. 1 year after packing my belongings and leaving Daniel's home without argument, my modest apartment had become gathering place for integrated family connection I could never have engineered through strategic maneuvering or emotional appeal. The pavilion dedicated today represented physical manifestation of values, realignment extending beyond reconciled relationship to meaningful community impact. As Catherine had texted during pivotal confrontation evening, "The real family inheritance is secure." Through painful disconnection and subsequent healing, we had discovered truth transcending financial assets or property considerations, legacy measured through values transmission and relationship quality rather than portfolio performance or estate valuation. The tables had turned not through revocation of maternal love, but through its most authentic expression, maintaining unwavering commitment to core principles that ultimately spoke more powerfully than any argument could articulate. By embodying values rather than merely discussing them, I had created space for their renewed appreciation across generations. The 74-year-old mother who had quietly departed rather than compromise foundational principles had ultimately turned tables through dignified demonstration rather than dramatic confrontation. The spreadsheet quantifying my presence as financial burden had inadvertently catalyzed profound reassessment, eventually revealing what genuine stewardship truly encompasses. Legacy measured through lives touched rather than assets transferred. Meaningful impact rather than market valuation. As I prepared for bed that evening, Margaret Wilson at 75, I recognized deeper wisdom in my mother's lesson from childhood. The true wealth of a community is measured by how it supports its most vulnerable members. By choosing community valuing contribution over household calculating cost, I had ultimately facilitated family healing that quarterly statements and investment returns could never have accomplished. The tables had indeed turned, transformation, flowing from authentic principle rather than strategic manipulation. In leaving without argument, I had ultimately created space for reconnection beyond what remaining could ever have achieved. 5 years after the day I walked out of my son's home with my modest possessions and a broken heart, I celebrated my 80th birthday in the pavilion that had come to symbolize our family's transformation. The spring evening carried perfect warmth, flowering trees surrounding the structure now fully matured into the landscape architect's original vision. String lights twinkled overhead as 4 generations gathered around tables arranged in a large circle, a physical manifestation of the connection that had been rebuilt through intentional effort and authentic values realignment. Speech. Called Frank Morrison, now 92, and using a walker but still delivering terrible puns with impeccable timing. Other voices joined the playful demand, until I finally rose from my seat at the center table, temporarily setting aside the handcrafted walking stick Catherine had brought from Guatemala during her most recent international assignment. At 80, I've earned the right to keep my remarks brief, I began, prompting appreciative laughter from those who knew my tendency toward thoughtful reflection rather than lengthy pronouncements. But milestones invite perspective, and tonight I find myself reflecting on an unexpected truth: that sometimes the most painful moments in our lives create openings for the most meaningful transformations. My gaze moved across the gathered faces, lakeside residents who had become beloved friends, foundation board members and program participants, family members both biological and chosen. Daniel sat with Jennifer and their children, now teenagers developing into thoughtful young adults with values alignment that would have made their grandfather proud. Catherine's presence represented particular celebration, as her international medical assignments typically limited birthday gatherings to video calls rather than physical presence. 5 years ago, I faced a spreadsheet that quantified my presence in terms of square footage and utility percentages, I continued, the reference generating knowing smiles from those familiar with our family story. Today, I'm surrounded by community that measures contribution through wisdom shared, gardens tended, and lives touched through genuine connection. This evolution, from calculated burden to valued elder, represented journey extending far beyond personal vindication to fundamental recalibration across generations. The transformation that began with dignified departure had expanded through intentional reconnection, eventually creating ripples extending beyond our immediate family to broader community impact. The most valuable inheritance we can leave isn't measured in financial statements or property deeds, I noted, echoing perspective that had become central to our family's shared understanding. It lives in the values transmitted, relationships nurtured, and community connections strengthened through intentional stewardship across generations. As I concluded these brief remarks and returned to my seat, Daniel rose unexpectedly from his place at the adjacent table. Unlike previous years when professional obligations had maintained subtle barrier against full presence, tonight he appeared completely engaged in the celebration. Designer suit replaced by casual attire, appropriate for outdoor gathering, smartphone, noticeably absent from his usual pocket check. "I'd like to add something, if I may," he requested with characteristic confidence, now balanced with genuine humility. When encouraging nods indicated clear permission, he continued with remarkable candor. "Many of you know parts of our family story. How Mom left my home 5 years ago after I presented a rental requirement that fundamentally misunderstood the nature of family relationship. This direct acknowledgement, publicly claiming responsibility, without minimization or excuse, demonstrated transformation extending far beyond private reconciliation to authentic accountability. Rather than protecting professional image through selective narrative, Daniel had embraced transparency that prioritized truth over reputation management. What fewer people realize is how completely that spreadsheet represented my misunderstanding of genuine stewardship," he continued thoughtfully. "I had developed sophisticated financial expertise while simultaneously losing connection with the foundational values that give those skills meaningful purpose. This recognition, that technical capability without values alignment, creates fundamentally inadequate life orientation, articulated principle that had gradually reshaped his professional approach over intervening years. The specialized practice focusing on values-aligned legacy planning had evolved from tentative consideration to established reality. Client relationships now centered on meaningful impact rather than maximized returns. Mom's quiet dignity in leaving accomplished what arguments never could," he acknowledged with genuine appreciation. "She created space for authentic reconsideration by demonstrating alternative community model valuing wisdom and contribution, beyond financial measurement." As Daniel continued expressing gratitude for lessons learned through painful disconnection and subsequent healing, I observed Catherine's thoughtful smile reflecting her role in facilitating initial reconciliation. Her international medical experience had provided unique perspective, integrating professional expertise with humanitarian values, framework that had significantly influenced her brother's evolving approach to financial services. The pavilion, where we gather tonight, represents physical manifestation of transformed understanding, Daniel noted, gesturing toward structure that had become community centerpiece. 5 years of intergenerational programs have created countless connections between seniors and young people, wisdom flowing across age boundaries through meaningful shared activities rather than abstract instruction. This reference to practical impact extending beyond family reconciliation to community transformation highlighted how personal healing had expanded toward broader contribution. The original Housing Security Foundation had developed robust programming, addressing not just immediate crisis intervention, but sustainable community development through integrated approach to intergenerational connection. As we celebrate Mom's 80 years, we're really honoring a legacy measured through lives touched rather than assets accumulated, Daniel concluded with evident sincerity. The most valuable inheritance isn't waiting in trust accounts or property deeds, but already flowing through values demonstrated and relationships strengthened across generations. As he returned to his seat amid appreciative applause, I felt Catherine's hand gently squeeze mine beneath the table. Silent acknowledgement of journey traversed since that pivotal evening in my apartment, when sibling connection had facilitated family reconciliation. Her professional responsibilities continued taking her to international crisis regions, yet intentional engagement during stateside transitions had maintained meaningful presence within both family relationships and foundation initiatives. The celebration continued with characteristic lakeside warmth, delicious food prepared by the community culinary team, musical performances from resident artists, and eventually birthday cake presented with appropriate fanfare. Throughout the evening, conversations flowed naturally between different generations and community connections, the artificial boundaries often separating age groups notably absent from our gathering. Thomas, now 15 and developing his father's analytical intelligence alongside more evident empathy, had recently completed documentary project interviewing lakeside residents about their life experiences, digital storytelling initiative preserving wisdom that might otherwise remain uncaptured. His sister Sophia had developed remarkable horticultural interest through regular participation in the community garden program, botanical knowledge flowing from elder mentors through practical application rather than abstract instruction. The multi-generational cooking class has become one of our most popular programs, Eleanor Jacobson noted during conversation lull, her coordinator role having expanded to include intergenerational programming oversight, seniors teaching traditional recipes, while younger participants introduce international flavors and modern techniques, genuine exchange rather than one-directional instruction. This approach, recognizing valuable contribution across age spectrum rather than hierarchical knowledge transfer, characterized programming throughout the pavilion's 5-year evolution. Technology workshops featured teenage instructors supporting seniors with digital navigation, while elders provided historical context, enhancing technical capabilities with purposeful application. Gardening initiatives integrated traditional wisdom with sustainable innovations, creating productive collaboration benefiting all participants. As evening progressed toward thoughtful conclusion, Daniel approached with Jennifer for private moment away from larger gathering. Unlike earlier years when professional demeanor had maintained subtle distance, their interaction now carried comfortable authenticity, reflecting significant personal growth alongside relationship healing. We wanted to share some news before making broader announcement, Jennifer began with warmth notably different from formal politeness that had characterized our early relationship. We've made final decision about the housing transition we've been considering. This reference continued conversation thread extending through recent years, as they had gradually reassessed priorities regarding property ownership and lifestyle choices. The substantial suburban home that had once represented achievement marker had increasingly appeared misaligned with evolving values, prioritizing meaningful engagement over status demonstration. We've purchased property about 15 minutes from Lakeside, Daniel explained. Obvious excitement replacing calculated presentation that would have characterized similar announcement years earlier. A modest farmhouse with several acres including small orchard and established garden beds. This direction, moving toward simplicity rather than expanded luxury, represented remarkable evolution from previous emphasis on prestigious addresses and impressive specifications. More significant than property characteristics, however, was intention behind this transition, as Jennifer continued explanation. The location allows regular involvement with foundation programs while providing space for expanded family gatherings, she noted with genuine enthusiasm. The additional building could eventually become guest quarters, or perhaps more permanent arrangement if that ever seemed appropriate for any of us. This open reference to potential future sharing, careful acknowledgement of possible needs without presumptive planning, demonstrated profound shift from transactional assessment that had characterized previous living arrangement. Rather than calculating space as financial consideration, their planning now incorporated relationship priorities alongside practical requirements. Catherine has already suggested potential garden expansion, incorporating medicinal plants from her international experiences, Daniel added, clear pleasure evident in his expression. And Thomas wants to establish beehives supporting orchard pollination while addressing food security priorities the foundation has identified locally. This integration, connecting family property with community engagement, represented sophisticated evolution beyond binary choices separating private ownership from public contribution. Rather than maintaining rigid boundary between personal resources and community involvement, their planning now incorporated intentional intersection creating meaningful impact alongside family enjoyment. The property settlement happens next month, Jennifer concluded with characteristic practicality, now balanced with genuine warmth. We'd love for you to help with planning how the space might best serve both family gatherings and community connections. Moving forward. This invitation, seeking input regarding future development rather than presenting completed decisions, represented another dimension of transformed relationship. Unlike earlier interactions where my perspective had been tolerated rather than valued, their approach now incorporated genuine interest in wisdom developed through decades of intentional living rather than merely respectful acknowledgement of maternal status. As celebration eventually concluded and guests gradually departed with warm birthday wishes, Catherine lingered to help with modest cleanup alongside remaining community members. Unlike earlier years when family gatherings had maintained distinct separation from broader relationships, the boundaries between relatives and community connections had gradually dissolved through regular meaningful interaction, rather than occasional, formal events. I'm staying locally for 3 weeks before the Nepal assignment begins, Catherine mentioned as we walked slowly back toward residential building, twilight settling around us with gentle spring breeze carrying floral fragrance from nearby gardens. The Foundation Board specifically scheduled program evaluations during this window to facilitate my participation alongside regular medical certification requirements. This intentional coordination, professional organizations adjusting schedules to maintain meaningful connection, represented another dimension of transformed priorities extending beyond family relationships to institutional arrangements. Rather than positioning work obligations and family engagement as competing demands requiring sacrifice, integrated approach now created mutually supportive structure, enhancing both dimensions. Daniel mentioned the Legacy Planning Symposium next week, she continued, referencing upcoming Foundation event exploring comprehensive approaches to intergenerational resource transmission. The integration of financial expertise with humanitarian perspective has created remarkably effective framework addressing both practical implementations and meaningful purpose alignment. This collaborative approach, financial services expertise, enhancing humanitarian impact rather than operating from competing frameworks, demonstrated sophisticated evolution in professional integration alongside personal reconciliation. Daniel's specialized practice now regularly partnered with international development initiatives Catherine coordinated, technical capabilities serving humanitarian priorities through complementary engagement rather than oppositional positioning. The documentary series exploring senior wisdom across cultural contexts has secured distribution through major educational platform, Catherine added, her international medical work having expanded to include structured wisdom preservation alongside healthcare delivery. Local production beginning here at Lakeside provided foundation now expanding through partner organizations in 6 countries where our medical teams maintain regular presence. This initiative, capturing elder wisdom through intentional documentation, represented practical implementation of values I had emphasized throughout their upbringing, transformed through professional capabilities into scalable program with significant impact beyond individual relationships. The intergenerational connection modeled at Lakeside had provided template now adapting across cultural contexts through thoughtful implementation rather than imposed standardization. Thomas asked particularly insightful questions during resident interviews. I noted with grandmother's pride, balanced with objective appreciation for his developing capabilities. His technical skills capturing digital content served genuine curiosity about life experiences rather than merely demonstrating technological proficiency. Catherine nodded agreement, her professional assessment complementing personal affection. His perspective integrates analytical intelligence with emotional awareness in remarkably balanced approach. The documentary project demonstrates technical competence while simultaneously revealing genuine connection with subjects, professional quality serving human-centered purpose. This evaluation, recognizing integration of technical capability with meaningful purpose, reflected values gradually reshaping family understanding across generations. Rather than positioning professional excellence against relationship investment as competing priorities, our evolved perspective now emphasized intentional alignment, creating enhanced outcomes through integrated approach. As we reached my apartment, comfortable silence fell between us. The easy quiet of relationship secure enough to rest in presence without constant verbal engagement. Unlike earlier years when conversation gaps created awkward tension, our connection had matured into confidence, allowing natural rhythms of engagement and reflection without performance pressure or evaluation anxiety. "I've been reflecting on something Dad often said," Catherine offered finally as we settled in my small living room, comfortable furnishings arranged for conversation rather than impression. "About how genuine security comes through relationship. Networks rather than financial reserves. Community connections providing resilience beyond individual resources regardless of account balances." This reference to Robert's wisdom, principles articulated throughout their childhood now finding renewed appreciation in adulthood, created powerful continuity, linking past guidance with present implementation through evolved understanding rather than rigid replication. The values transmission flowing across generations had maintained core principles while allowing authentic adaptation, addressing current circumstances rather than mechanical reproduction. He demonstrated that philosophy through practical choices, I acknowledged, memories warming my expression. Prioritizing municipal position, allowing family engagement rather than pursuing private sector advancement requiring constant travel and extensive hours. Maintaining modest home within financial reach rather than stretching toward impressive property creating constant pressure. This recollection, specific examples illustrating abstract principles, provided concrete connection between philosophical values and practical implementation. Rather than presenting stewardship as merely theoretical framework, these tangible choices demonstrated how principles manifest through daily decisions creating cumulative impact beyond individual transactions. Daniel has discovered similar wisdom through dramatically different pathway, Catherine observed with insightful recognition of her brother's unique journey. His specialized practice now structures financial resources serving relationship priorities and community impact rather than positioning wealth accumulation as primary objective deserving relationship sacrifice. This assessment, acknowledging genuine transformation without minimizing significant redirection required, demonstrated gracious perspective, allowing authentic evolution without demanding performative conversion. Daniel had not abandoned financial expertise but discovered its appropriate application within comprehensive values framework prioritizing meaningful impact alongside responsible management. The tensions remain real, I acknowledged. Honesty preventing oversimplified narrative suggesting complete resolution without continuing challenges. Professional environments constantly reinforce market-based metrics as primary success indicators. Maintaining different perspective requires intentional counterpressure through regular community engagement and meaningful relationship investment. This recognition, that transformed understanding, requires ongoing reinforcement rather than one-time realization, demonstrated mature perspective preventing naive expectation of perfect implementation without continuing effort. The values realignment flowing through family relationships represented journey requiring constant attention rather than destination reached through single dramatic confrontation. That's why regular connection with this community matters so significantly, Catherine noted, gesturing toward window overlooking gardens now visible primarily through lamplit pathways in evening darkness. Lakeside provides tangible demonstration of alternative metrics beyond financial calculation. Wisdom valued alongside wealth, contribution measured through lives touched rather than accounts managed. This insight, recognizing how community, environment shapes individual perspective. Articulated principle, explaining why my quiet departure had ultimately proven more transformative than continued accommodation or confrontational argument. By establishing presence within values-aligned community, rather than accepting spreadsheet-defined relationship, I had created visible alternative demonstrating different priorities through practical implementation rather than theoretical discussion. 5 years ago, I never imagined my departure would ultimately strengthen rather than sever family connection, I admitted with candid reflection characteristic of our evolved relationship. The spreadsheet calculating my presence as financial burden seemed definitive statement about relationship valuation rather than opportunity for fundamental reconsideration. Catherine's thoughtful nod acknowledged this perspective without minimizing painful reality of that difficult moment. Your dignity in leaving demonstrated greater wisdom than any argument could have articulated, she observed with professional insight, complimenting daughter's appreciation. Creating space for authentic reconsideration rather than defensive justification, allowing genuine transformation beyond superficial accommodation. This assessment, recognizing power in principled action beyond persuasive argument, captured essential dynamic explaining how apparent disconnection had ultimately facilitated meaningful reconciliation. By maintaining alignment with core values rather than accepting diminished relationship definition, I had created opportunity for eventual healing beyond what compromised accommodation could have achieved. As our conversation continued into evening, touching on foundation initiatives and family developments alongside philosophical reflections, I recognized how completely tables had turned from that painful moment 5 years earlier. The spreadsheet calculating my presence as liability had inadvertently catalyzed transformation, revealing my most valuable contribution. Wisdom developed through decades of intentional living, now flowing through relationships across generations. Daniel's professional capabilities now served meaningful purpose beyond wealth accumulation or status demonstration. Catherine's humanitarian work had secured institutional support, recognizing value connecting professional expertise with family engagement. Grandchildren were developing balanced perspective, integrating technical competence with genuine human connection through regular, meaningful interaction, rather than obligatory visits. Most importantly, our family had discovered legacy extending far beyond financial statements or property deeds. Values transmission flowing through intentional relationship. Investment and community connection rather than merely asset accumulation or estate planning. The financial resources remained important dimension of responsible stewardship, but now served meaningful purpose within comprehensive framework, prioritizing relationship impact alongside material provision. When Catherine eventually departed, with warm embrace and plans for breakfast together the following morning, I prepared for sleep with profound gratitude for journey traversed since that painful departure 5 years earlier. The modest apartment that had initially represented uncomfortable downsizing now embodied right-sized living, aligned with values prioritizing relationship over impression, contribution over accumulation. As I settled into bed, a text message notification illuminated my phone screen. Daniel's evening check-in continuing practice established during recent years. The birthday celebration perfectly embodied what matters most. Thank you for teaching us through both words and actions what genuine legacy truly encompasses. Love you, Mom. This simple message, expressing authentic appreciation without performance or obligation, represented relationship restoration flowing from genuine transformation rather than strategic reconciliation. The spreadsheet had calculated my presence as financial burden, but subsequent years had gradually revealed immeasurable contribution impossible to quantify through market metrics, yet profoundly valuable within meaningful relationship framework. 80 years I had discovered truth transcending financial statements or property deeds. Legacy measured through values, transmission, and relationship quality rather than portfolio performance or estate valuation. By choosing dignified independence over compromised accommodation, I had ultimately facilitated family healing that quarterly statements and investment returns could never have accomplished. The tables had indeed turned through 5 years of intentional reconnection following painful separation. The 74-year-old mother who packed modest possessions and left without argument had ultimately demonstrated strength, requiring no defensive justification or manipulative control. By embodying values rather than merely discussing them, I had created space for their renewed appreciation across generations. As sleep gradually approached, my thoughts returned to garden metaphor that had framed much of my understanding throughout life journey. The painful departure had created necessary space for new growth, like garden beds cleared of tangled vegetation, allowing intentional cultivation aligned with genuine priorities rather than accumulated habits. The 5 years since had provided seasonal cycles of planting, tending, occasional pruning, and ultimately abundant harvest, extending beyond individual satisfaction to nourish broader community through meaningful connection. The spreadsheet that had calculated my presence as financial burden had inadvertently revealed what spreadsheets fundamentally cannot measure: wisdom developed through decades of intentional living, values transmission flowing through, authentic relationship, legacy encompassing lives touched rather than merely assets transferred. By choosing alignment with these deeper priorities rather than accepting diminished definition, I had ultimately facilitated transformation beyond what continued accommodation could ever have accomplished. The most valuable turning of tables had not involved manipulation or control, but rather steadfast commitment to principles that eventually inspired authentic reconsideration rather than defended justification. The community, valuing wisdom and contribution, had demonstrated alternative to household calculating cost, eventually inspiring transformation extending beyond family reconciliation to meaningful community impact through integrated perspective, balancing relationship investment alongside resource stewardship. As I drifted toward sleep surrounded by evidence of purposeful living at 80 years, I recognized deeper wisdom and values that had guided my journey from childhood through current elder status. The true wealth of both individuals and communities indeed flows through relationship networks, providing resilience beyond financial reserves. Security emerging through connection rather than merely accumulation, meaning developed through contribution rather than possession. The tables had turned not through strategic maneuvering, but authentic values alignment that eventually revealed what really matters across generations. Legacy measured through lives touched rather than accounts managed. Wisdom shared rather than assets accumulated. By simply living these principles when maintaining them required difficult choices, I had ultimately facilitated transformation that arguments or manipulation could never have accomplished. 5 years after quietly packing my belongings and leaving. Without argument, I had discovered that sometimes turning the tables requires no dramatic confrontation or strategic positioning, just dignified commitment to values that eventually speak more eloquently than any spreadsheet calculation could possibly measure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.